Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia. I'm Thom Duval. I'm the pastor of Word of Hope Lutheran Church in Lexington, Kentucky. And this is the sermon redo for the 5th Sunday of Easter, April 28, 2013. The gospel reading is from John chapter 13. Now when he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Love one another as I have loved you, Jesus says. Love one another as I have loved you. If we're seeking to follow Jesus, if we're seeking to be one of his disciples, one of his learners, one of his listeners, one of the Jesus people, then this exhortation, this encouragement to love one another as we have been loved has a particular power. I believe, though, that it has an additional piece of impact to it because of when Jesus said this. It's on the night of his betrayal. You get the sense he knows that the end is near. You get the sense that even the disciples have picked up from him that the end is near. He is talking about those things which lie at the heart of what he's all about, who he is, what he's here for. And it's in that context that he breaks bread. This is my body, this is my blood. It's in that context that he washes the disciples' feet and says, if I, your teacher, have done this to you, what do you think you're supposed to be doing for other folks? And it's in this context, knowing that death is drawing that much closer, that he says, love one another as I have loved you. Wow. Does that have impact? One of the difficulties I believe that we have in hearing this is we get kind of fuzzy as to what love is. I mean, it's possible to hear this. There goes those Jesus people. They're talking about love again. Love, 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 love. Yeah, great. But that's only because in our society, love is often seen only as an emotion, an affect, something that I feel. And that really doesn't grab the length and breadth and depth of the biblical witness. Yeah, it's there in the biblical witness, emotion, affection, feeling. But far more than that, in the biblical witness, love is a commitment. It's based on God's love for us, God's commitment for us. As when you get this picture in your mind of God down on his knees in the Garden of Eden, forming clay together and then breathing into it, and forms us in the image of God. God is totally committed to us. So that when throughout this long history of God with the people of God, we're constantly thumbing our nose at God and going our own way, you don't necessarily get the sense that God is saying, oh, aren't they just the cutest little things? I just love them so much. You get the sense much more that God is committed to us and will do whatever it takes to restore the relationships, to bring us back. I believe we see that most vividly in Jesus, that God will do whatever it takes. And in John 3:16 it is, for God so loved the world that he gave his son. That's not that syrupy, drippy, sticky kind of emotion. That is this very real commitment on God's part to reconcile, to bring us back, to make the connection, to heal us, to open up a way that welcomes us home. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. And it's in the presence of Jesus that we realize what love really is all about. That if we're going to love, we're first probably going to have to learn about love from Him. And here I have a little bit of a problem. I think that we as Christians, we're quick to hear that. Love one another. Love one another. Got to love one another. Why are you doing what you're doing? Well, because Jesus said you got to love one another. And a lot of times our love comes across as cold and perfunctory and as going through the motions and hard and just not very nice. It's because we miss the most important first part, and that is, as I have loved you, Jesus says. The thing about real love, godly love, love that Jesus, with which Jesus loves us, the real thing about that is that it's humbling. It's always humbling to truly be loved, to know that someone has committed himself, herself, totally to me, in spite of me, is going to be committed to me. There's something incredibly humbling about that. And then that influences the way in which we love one another. It's not from a position of power. It's not from a position of gaining the upper hand. It's from a position of having been humbled, having been loved in spite of myself. And then I'm ready to make that, to go beyond that affection, that feeling. I'm ready to go beyond a commitment. I think it was C.S. Lewis who once wrote that if you don't feel any love for your neighbor, go ahead and love them anyway. Go through the motions, do the stuff, the loving stuff, and the emotions will follow. Love is a commitment. Love is a commitment that humbles us, and love is always a risk. When Jesus reaches out His hands to the world and comes back with fistfuls of hot stabbing pain in His wrists from the nails, He risks Himself for our sake. And love, the kind of love with which we have been loved, the kind of love that we attempt to use to love the world, yeah, it's always going to have a risk to us. It's always going to have it's going to run the risk that it's not going to be accepted, and that we get it wrong, that we simply get it wrong. I think love is always going to be something that's in process. I don't know why it is that people come into the building of a church within four walls and think that now I've got it all nailed down. And why are we reluctant to come inside these walls? Is it because everybody else gets it? Because everybody else has this perfect, but I'm the only one who doesn't? To be invited to follow Jesus is to recognize from the get-go that I'm imperfect, that I'm going to have to learn love, and I'm going to get it wrong a lot of times. But that it's still His love that will sustain me, not the number of times when I've gotten it right. That's not what keeps me going. What keeps me going is His love for me. It is a process, and I would even go out on a limb here and say the love of Jesus gives me the right to be wrong. To take my best shot at loving someone else and maybe even loving myself, and know that I'm going to be wrong. It gives me the right to be wrong because His love involves forgiveness. His love involves new life. His love constantly is in process, and it brings me to the point, the realization that it's not about my perfection. It's about His perfection for me. I think love ends up being very much the kind of thing that you want to pass on. We are people who want to pass on good things. If we hear about a place that's selling gas 25 cents cheaper, we tell somebody. If we know about a really good deal, and by the way, finding a plumber can be a really good thing, we want to pass it on. And that's the way the love of Jesus really is. Each week we put out a weekly sheet, and I try to include a quote from some source or another. And I like these quotes. What can I say? This quote is from the Roman Emperor Julian, and he's commenting on the activities of the early church. And by the way, Emperor Julian was not a Christian. But his quote is, "The godless Galileans feed our poor in addition to their own." Wow. Talk about risking. Talk about process. Talk about wanting to pass it on. Many years ago, I bought this print. I hope you can see it. I hope it comes through pretty well. It's from Salvador Dali. And I love this. It's Jesus on the cross, and he's hanging over the world, and he's looking down on a very ordinary scene. It's some fishermen, and I assume that it is at Galilee. For God so loved the world. God was committed to the world. Jesus has been committed to us, and he committed himself, God himself committed to death on the cross. And yeah, it's to follow in his footsteps. Love's gonna get us committed, but it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't trade for the world, because it's the greatest thing in the world. That Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia.